I've tried filming this a few times now and it's really not been working, but hopefully this time will be okay. I've always been quite reclusive and over the last few years isolated, not necessarily in a bad way because it really does suit me, but I can see how the last few months are starting to have an effect and I'm quite out of practice talking like this, and also I'm not sure how I'm possibly going to be able to force myself back out into the world again as it slowly starts to open up. Something that I'm really good at is to research a topic that interests me incredibly thoroughly, and I will want to know everything that there possibly is to know about it. And leading up to when I was diagnosed at the beginning of this year and still now, autism is something that I've really enjoyed investigating, mainly as a way of having a higher degree of self-knowledge. My diagnosis is of autism spectrum disorder. There's no functioning level or label applied, but I know that these are out there, and I know that quite probably from an outside perspective it would seem as though I would be classified as having high functioning autism. While this is true in some respects, it's really not the whole story, and functioning levels just really aren't helpful when talking about autism and autistic people. It may also seem as though autism for me is something mild, that it takes a moderate form, maybe that it means that I'm quiet and a bit sensitive and quirky, but this is really not the case either. I'm only ever speaking for myself, but it's never going to be my aim to seem as though I'm not autistic, or it's never going to be a mark of success to be indistinguishable from a non-autistic person. Autism isn't something that needs to be overcome, it's a neurological difference. I've spent pretty much 30 years, even when I didn't know that this is what I was doing, but spent a long time forcing myself to hide or internalise pretty much all of my autistic traits and behaviours. So that has meant that me being autistic has been invisible from most people who I've encountered, and it was also invisible from me for a very long time in a way because I didn't know that I'm autistic. I think as well, because there are so many misunderstandings, misconceptions and stereotypes surrounding autism, if I'm to say to someone, oh, I'm autistic, then it's very tempting for them to compare the way that I present myself to a more obvious presentation of autism and think that what I experience must be less severe, but that is not how it works. If I appear as though I'm coping with things, that's because other people are only seeing what I choose for them to see. And I think that will still be the case now for me because there is so much sort of negativity surrounding autism and what it looks like, and so much stigma that I think maybe people can say, oh well, you don't seem autistic, as if that is a good thing, but it's not. And I think that while there is maybe a general awareness of autism, there's not really that much understanding and acceptance. There are so many positives to being autistic, and everything that I value in myself is inseparable from me being autistic because that is how my brain is wired, it's how I process everything. So autism isn't something that needs to be treated, but that doesn't mean that being autistic doesn't cause challenges for me every day and every moment of the day, because it does. Even if those aren't immediately obvious to most people from the way that I externally behave and react. I think just to start with on functioning, and I'm still really sorting out how I feel and think about all of this, but from what I can see, functioning really ultimately means how much of a problem or an inconvenience an autistic person seems to be to a non-autistic person. So if on the surface it seems as though there's nothing wrong, then an autistic person is classified as being high functioning. But just because any struggles are going unseen and invisible, that doesn't mean that they're not there. Every social setting and public place is stressful for me, and it really varies how well I'm able to cope with that level of stress. So for example, if I'm out somewhere and I'm trying to have a conversation with someone, not that this happens all that often, but if I'm trying to do this, then at the same time I'm also working really hard to filter out all of the sensory things that are going on, and I'm trying to not be overwhelmed by maybe a new location, and also trying to navigate social expectations. And then it can be quite often impossible to actually concentrate on the interaction, even if I really do want to, and I won't be able to process things quickly, and I won't be able to respond in a way that is accurate or truthful, and then in hindsight will get very frustrated with myself. So that's just one example. But even at home, where I feel safe and relatively relaxed, and I can be to an extent in control of my environment, even then there are so many things that can happen that really affect how able I am to function. So things such as changes, anything unexpected, maybe an accumulation of emotional things that need untangling. There are so many things that really affect me, things that I think people would assume I wouldn't have much of a problem with. It's only really my mum and my sister, and we're really close. It's only them who see me and interact with me when I'm not filtering myself and when I'm being my authentic autistic self. Everyone else only sees what I feel comfortable or safe enough around them to show them, and of course everyone is selective about what they will show to other people and will modify their behaviour perhaps in different situations, but for autistic people this is very different. It takes an enormous amount of energy but also feels necessary for survival. Just speaking for me, it's by now very difficult to even know when I'm doing this, so I won't then be able to drop my mask even when I want to, and the covering up of anything that would suggest that I'm different in the sense of being autistic has always been detrimental to my emotional and physical well-being. Even just speaking like this isn't reflective at all of what communication is really like for me, or at least what spoken communication is like for me, because obviously I can make notes and take my time and have another go at expressing the thing that I had intended to, and related to that I know I can be eloquent and articulate, and I know I seem intelligent because I am, but then that doesn't mean that there aren't other things that I struggle with. And from what I've experienced, it can be difficult for people to fully appreciate that contradiction, that while I can be competent and capable in many areas, there are then other things that I do need support with or reassurance with, or that are at times impossible for me. And when I say that I can't do something, I do mean that I can't do something, not that I won't. And if I seem as though I'm coping or functioning or living in the way that people would expect me to, then what goes unseen then is how I've had to prepare myself for every situation or interaction, and also the repercussions afterwards. So that is in terms of needing a very long time to recover from even very small social things. And I've also always experienced shutdowns and meltdowns. Shutdowns for me, when I didn't know what they were, I would just think of them as when I am completely zoned out. I won't be able to speak or respond or process anything that's happening, but maybe I have been able to be physically present somewhere, so then it's looked as though I'm okay, I'm just off on my own, being quiet, but internally I'm checked out and I've completely withdrawn from the thing that is overwhelming. Meltdowns are not easy to talk about. There are so many misunderstandings and the word is thrown about so much. For me, they are when I've absolutely reached my limit or gone beyond it and I can't take in any more or deal with anything else or process anything else, and they're usually an accumulation of things. But for the most part, there have been some memorable exceptions, but for the most part I can delay or suppress a meltdown until I'm away from a person or from people, until I'm out of a situation. So this has meant again that my true reaction to having been overwhelmed has not been visible to most people, and I think it would probably be quite shocking because I am so careful most of the time to be quite in control and to not give anything away about how I'm feeling. But it gets to a point where I do lose the ability to control this, and I wouldn't want to try and hide or minimise a meltdown any more than I already do, because while there are things that I can definitely put into place to stop myself from getting to the point of a meltdown, very often they're caused by things that I could not possibly have anticipated. And I know now, and I can start to allow myself to accept that for an autistic person, a meltdown is an absolutely valid and proportional response to having been overwhelmed, and those emotions are allowed to have an external outlet, as extreme as that can be. I think because I do have a relatively high level of self-control, it would seem as though I could control these things, and to an extent obviously I do, in the way that they are internalised until they can't be anymore. But whereas at a time like this I can rationalise and I can put things into perspective, when I am so overwhelmed, then it gets to a certain point where I just cannot do that. The last thing, or one of the last things I want to say about functioning, is that it really does vary. So maybe I've managed to do something in the past which I can't do right now, but also maybe there's something that feels too much right now that will seem manageable in the future. A really helpful way of thinking about this was explained to me during my assessment, that yes, there is an autism spectrum, but you're not stuck on one end or the other or at one point of it. You can move around, and I know that this is definitely true for me. There are days and times when I seem and feel less autistic, and times when I seem and feel more autistic, and that is okay. And as well, if I seem to have been coping, or I've managed to meet some expectation or appeared to function, then that's only been because I've had systems in place that would let me do that. So for me, that is having a routine and knowing what is going to happen. Lots of things, also having reassurance with certain things, but as soon as something changes or disappears within that system, then my ability to function also disappears, so it's actually very fragile. So my neighbours are over there and I never make eye contact with them, and now I look like I'm talking to myself in a corner. That's fine. And as well, I've really in the past pushed myself to appear as though I'm functioning in the way that people would expect me to, and I just don't want to and can't really do that anymore. It's been exhausting, and I know now that it's okay to do things on my own timeline and to do things in a way that suits me rather than in a way that would be expected of me. And I feel as though I've just been sort of existing from one overwhelming thing to the next and just surviving from one overwhelming thing to the next, and I just want to do more than survive. When I've spent so much time trying to hide anything that would suggest that I'm autistic, then it's not left me with the energy to pursue the things that I'm good at and pursue the things that I want to. So hopefully now I can find a way to do that. I don't know what the solution is, but I've lost so much of myself trying to maintain the illusion of functioning. So I want to find a way to live that suits me, and I don't really know what that will look like, but it's an ongoing process. Oh, I don't know. So I think that's all I want to say. There's a lot more that could be said, but being autistic really should change things, even if it's just for myself to know that I have alternative requirements, and it's okay to need to put these requirements into place that will let me not feel overwhelmed. But as well, I think if another person just assumes that me being autistic really doesn't mean anything, then that's only because I've hidden so much of how I react and respond and process the world from them. And so I hope that I can start to be unapologetic about the way I am and about being autistic. But I think that's enough. And yes,